You're the type of asshole that like like zones into the thing and then like oh shoot I need AFK.
Oh,
Then
when
like
I'm
you
when I'm role playing.
or no when you're like doing content they like but you actually like you're going and like I don't know like lightning a bowl or something like that.
When I'm getting into a queue.
Yeah.
And
You're the tank that goes AFK as soon as you zone in.
I actually understand. I can understand DPS that do that because it's just like once you get to that number 4 in queue or whatever, you like I need to pee but Q I need to pee but Q I need to pee but Q. Shit. And now I bought the caffeine.
All right.
I've been holding off on the caffeine until now because I can. Is my chatbot working? I don't even know. It was acting up on me when I was losing power before.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, let me. It. Yeah, it worked. Okay. Working as expected.
There we go. All on Twitter now.
Yay! This feels weird. Like not having a game in front of me.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, I'm sitting here playing Minecraft on my laptop while we did.
Wow.
Oh yeah. I'll pull up the slide. What slide? Oh wait, give me a second. There's a zombie.
Creepers! God damn it!
I had one of my role playing friends joined our Minecraft server.
Mm-hmm.
I was following them around, just spawning shit behind them. While I was vanished, so like they couldn't even see me.
Wow.
I know. I am
and
the
you wonder
worst.
why your friends have trust issues.
They had trust issues before they met me.
No.
Oh no, it's a Vela.
Uh-oh.
Oh wait, I need to set up the thing so that Vela can pun us whenever she wants on the stream. Give me a second.
Do you have to?
What? Okay, it's active. So Vela, you can do that thing that I showed you before. Now.
Don't do it. It's a trap.
Do it.
We were just talking. We were just talking about how Malgrim pulls tricks on people and does horrible things, like follow people around invisible, spawning monsters. Do you trust him now?
Vala hasn't had the chance yet. Okay, give me a second. Oh, it doesn't work when the bot does it. Oops.
Oh. See, you're trying to troll again, weren't you?
What?
You're trying to troll again, weren't you?
I wasn't trolling anyone. I was giving Vela the link to do the thing. Oh no, wait a second. I've made a grave mistake in this area. I've made a grave mistake. The better question is, do I trust my mods to not get my stream shut down?
I mean, I am one of your mods, so...
You got a point.
See,
I'm waiting to see if anyone notices that the screen isn't how it usually is. Oops. I can't cheer on my own channel. I can't give myself my own money.
I mean, yeah. Probably giving Twitch a small cut as well.
well, you can't cheer your own channel, so
Right.
they already get their money off the ad rev from, because the way you cheer bits is you watch ads or you buy it from them.
Right.
So they get their 8 cents. It's fine. Actually, I thought it was funny because I was able to pull up some analytics. Sorry, give me a second.
Oh.
I'm sorry. And so like one advertisement per person viewing equals like 1/1000th of a cent of a dollar.
Oh my.
So if you only have one viewer with ad revenue going, they have to view 10 advertisements to get 1 penny. If I'm doing my decimal work correct. So to get $1 off of having one viewer, you have to run 1,000 ads.
Or run an ad in front of 1,000 people to get $1.
Yeah. So.
In other words, don't hold your breath.
Right. So knowing this analytic, we can do some math to figure out how much money TV makes. Based off their, 10 million people watch,
Right.
Whatever. Oh, they made a whole $1,000 off that. Good for them. Well, I mean,
that's probably per ad and whatnot, yeah.
And then they run, 10 ads per block and.
Right. So. Bill turned off ad block just for you.
If only that money came to me. I don't. So here's some behind the scenes. On Twitch, when you're an affiliate, which I am, I don't get ad revenue off Twitch. That money goes immediately to Twitch. Oh yeah, the bits true too. Kind of. I still don't get money off bits. It's kind of a sad cycle here.
Yeah, because you need to have a minimum amount of payout before they consider it worthwhile to cut you a check.
Yeah, basically. Oh, we got our first ad on the stream. Ooh. And then a 2-second message.
Blink and you'll miss it.
And an ad in the chat. Thank you. Thank you for promising to behave. Where's Zajara? He usually pops in by now.
We just got a third viewer, so.
We
just got a third viewer.
Say that one more time.
We just got a third viewer.
Okay. Oh, there's Zajara. Speak of the devil.
And he appears.
So we're doing something a little different for everyone that's here. We're not playing a game today. I know we're all so disappointed.
To see Mulgrim's pretty Warframe hopping around endlessly.
Horns.
Mm.
Oh no. Oh no, we've given Dejara ideas.
How very metal of you. But yeah, so basically what we're gonna do is basically treat this like more like a normal podcast. Yeah, and so basically kind of focus on the topic. We're gonna probably run a little shorter, and this is our first time, so forgive us if we're a little uneven here, but we're gonna try to try new things, see how it works out. And for the first topic, I've talked about Richard Bartle's um, player types for MMOs and text mods. And we talked about like there's another player model system based on Nick Yee's work. But then so and then I remembered another uh, player motivation model by someone I know, Nicole Lazaro. So I thought we basically would talk about player, basically these player motivation models, kind of tools that designers use in order to kind of like anticipate how players are going to react to game design decisions. And keep in mind, like these kind of have like a lot of the same problems you have with any kind of like rules of thumb or assumptions or things like that. A lot of the issue is going to be a lot of the problem is going to be you're going to run into kind of a it'll be easy to kind of find examples of where this thing doesn't apply, or where basically kind of where a stereotype doesn't fit, or and there's always kind of a danger of treating players like a big monolithic block. So basically kind of what kind of the point of this thing is basically kind of show like kind of like the models that that developers are kind of build in their head, because the flip side of that is that a designer can't consider every single person that's going to play. They want to kind of consider general broad strokes. And so kind of the idea is if you're using Bartle stuff, killers will treat this content like this, and achievers will do this, and or we want to appeal to more explorers because they have this effect on other players.
It's kind of like graphing trends.
Like, right. Or demographics, or kind of like when you're speaking in broad terms here, which aren't always the going to apply 100%.
Mm-hmm.
But in general terms, they probably will, especially Nikki and Nicole Lazaro's stuff, because they've actually done a lot of some research, and that they've built their models based on empirical observation and research.
Whereas Bartle's is purely observational.
Right. But I mean, like he still had quite a bit of experience. But yeah, so and kind of like the other kind of useful thing here too is that these models kind of provide a shortcut for designers to kind of discuss things. If you're an MMO designer and Bartle's types, you could kind of say, oh well, this is we're building this content for explorer types, and someone who understands the Bartle's model will have a good idea of like what you mean and how it applies. So
did somebody say WildStar?
Oh, we can get into that. You want me to start with an anecdote about that?
I mean, if you want to.
Richard Bartle is actually a personal friend of mine, and WildStar pretty unabashedly kind of copied his work. Basically, they had the 4 types of players, and they had these professions you could use. They were basically kind of like secondary things for your character. And what they talked about was that each of these secondary professions is supposed to kind of appeal toward one of Bartle's 4 types. For example, the socializer could basically build up a resource location that would give people buffs if they went and got to it. The idea being that they could create a gathering place for people to kind of hang around and socialize. and I was talking to Bro about this. I'm like, oh, hey, it's really interesting somebody used that. And he's like, well, first of all, nobody consulted me about it. I'm like,
Right.
oh, that's awkward. And the second thing he said was that, I really didn't play much WildStar, so I didn't know a whole lot about the system. But he was like, if you really look at it, though, essentially each of the things is actually just achiever focused
Mm-hmm.
because it all it all works towards achiever type goals of basically maximizing your return, demonstrating mastery, mastering the game. For example, like setting up the buff stations helps the achievers by giving them buffs so that they can achieve faster. And there's nothing that kind of encouraged anybody to actually sit around and participate. And like oftentimes when you do have something like that, it's kind of seen as kind of not a great thing. Kind of going to looking at Star Wars Galaxies, they had the dancer profession. The idea basically like as you took kind of damage to your stats and got healed, you would start taking long-term permanent damage or semi-permanent damage that had to be healed by basically going and sitting essentially in a cantina. Um, and the idea for that design was essentially the same thing here. It was like to give people a social hub to sit down and talk. Of course, most achievers hate it because they really didn't want to sit around and waste time healing when they wanted to be out there gaining points.
Yeah, and in the later version of the game, they were buffers because they took away that the stat damage,
Right.
and they became buffers, and a lot of, I guess, the achiever oriented players would actually tip the dancers very well if
Right.
they as like an appreciation for the dancer doing what they were doing and for being able to provide the buff that they wanted without error, because apparently it was really hard to push the right button on the menu.
Right. But ultimately, all WildStar's professions were essentially achiever focused.
Even though they would claim, oh yeah, settlers are supposed to be socializers, explorers are supposed to be explorers, it wasn't.
Right. It all basically, like the game was like a lot of modern MMOs was very achiever focused.
And Dejar says that he seems to remember that they claimed that it was independently invented, which they can claim, but it's kind of funny how.
No. I knew some of the developers. They referenced Bartle directly.
Oh, did they?
Yeah. They knew exactly. Yeah. I mean, like, there's some developers on there that there's no way. I mean, maybe they kind of came up with the idea and then basically kind of like said, oh, if they squint and said, oh, actually, this kind of fits Bartle's types in a way. But yeah, I mean, to say, I don't quite believe that this was it was completely independently developed. But yeah, so and so I mean, this kind of shows also kind of one of the downsides of these models is that they sometimes they can be really easily misunderstood. Like Bartle's types tend to be there's a lot of misunderstanding about them. Right. There's a Desires says story makes sense, but you're just saying. But it's easy to kind of misunderstand the models. For Bartle's types, like a lot of people assume that especially coming from modern MMOs, everybody kind of looks at things through the achiever lens, um, and because most games are very very heavily focused toward achievement. The other thing too is like it can be really hard to kind of say, oh, this specific behavior is primarily for this motivation, because they tend to blur together. Kind of the example from Bartle's work was that like an explorer may want to get to top level because they because they want more options to go explore. Usually at higher levels you're going to have more options, you're going to have more access to areas, you might be able to travel some areas with a lot less danger. And so like, an explorer might might work a character up to max level, usually very efficiently because they know the mechanics a lot better. But you know something that might look like achiever motivate, achiever behavior may actually be an exploration, helping exploration behavior.
Yeah.
The other thing too is is basically people assuming that each of the motivation, like everybody has like one primary motivation. Even though Bartle didn't say one way or another, he kind of nodded and said, like people can have multiple motivations, obviously.
Yeah, I actually found a blog uh from 2014 talking about WildStar
Mm-hmm.
and in its correlation with Bartles. And
Mm-hmm.
I mean it's basically an agreement with what you're saying, but I I just wanted to point out that other people have made those observations as well.
Right.
So we're not just talking out our asses.
Not entirely. But yeah, and so that's kind of what we wanted to kind of give a go tonight. Start talking about the motivations, and so and we'll be talking a lot about these things. We'll provide links where appropriate. Mologram's going to show some things up on the screen to show some of the things we want to discuss. But yeah, so like and kind of review, we're going to talk about three kind of player motivation models. The first is Bartle's four player types. The second one is going to be Nicky's. His company Quantic Foundry has these gamer motivations, and then Nicole Zaro has what she calls four keys to fun. And so yeah. So I figured we'll dive right into Bartles. We've kind of I've discussed this several times before. Um, and I think that so people anybody who's kind of like seen anybody who's listened to us before probably this is going to be old hat, but we're going to go over it again because just for the sake of completeness. But yeah, so Bartle has four major types: achiever, socializer, killer, and explorer. He put these on two axes where you have world versus people, and then you had interact with and act upon. So achievers act upon the world, socializers interact with people, killers act upon people, and explorers interact with the world. And kind of so the achiever mindset is the type that wants to uh, essentially demonstrate mastery. Um, Primarily to kind of show other people kind of like so other people kind of like are impressed by it. These are like kind of the hardcore raiders, the people that do like hard content, do the very challenging content, and then like the really glowy unique weapon designs to show off like how uber they are. Socializers are the people that talk to each other. um, Pretty self-explanatory. These are the people that hang out and chat. um,
The role
uh,
players.
yeah, role players to a large extent. But this is going to also include the people kind of sit around and zone chat or shout chat or whatever, just kind of like shooting the breeze and seemingly doing very little in the game itself, but but they still use the game as kind of a context or you know as a way to kind of find other like-minded people. Because if you're playing a game like Final Fantasy 14 or World of Warcraft or whatnot, the other people are gonna at least have something in common with you, which is an important thing for socializing with other people.
There, I put the footage up of socializing.
Ah, there you go.
There, you can't.
Dirty role players.
I know. I think we were raiding someone's house that night. I don't remember.
Yeah. But yeah, so socialization, like playing is live, interacting with other people. There's kind of a creative aspect to it. But for the large part, it's about kind of getting other people and telling collaborative stories. Um, and then we have the explorers, which are kind of people that want to kind of have two goals. They like to explore out the world and explore out the game mechanics. Um, people who want to kind of see like a lot of times they also have like a really deep knowledge of these things. So exploring the world, they might know like the really kind of interesting places. And exploring mechanics, they might know kind of where the system kind of breaks down, things to exploit, that type of thing.
I have a small example for that when you're ready for it.
Yeah, go for it.
Okay. It's like 30 seconds. It's a little hard to tell, but we can explain what we're looking for.
Right.
But basically in 14, there's this dungeon called Halotali, and it has these little crusher balls that come down from the ceiling and smashes things. And you can get the mobs to stand under them, and it'll apply a buff that makes them take more damage, and it just speeds up that room faster.
Right.
So that's an example of like an explorer thing for someone to figure out.
Right. Right. And so kind of knowing kind of interesting little details about it. Like, you don't have to use that, but if you observe and you see the crusher ball coming down, and if you fighting enemies nearby and you see that the crusher ball happens to apply that debuff to make the enemies take a little more damage. Yeah, I mean, and a lot of time again, but this kind of feeds into like a lot of times the role of an explorer was basically kind of usually to help the achievers. The achievers would basically like go to the explorers and ask like, oh, how do I do this thing? Like, these days, like generally we have wikis and data mining and things like that, which kind of take over a lot of the work that explorers used to do in the older games.
It could be argued though that those are the explorers filling out the wikis and doing the data mining. It's kind of evolved
to some extent. I think a lot of I think because like usually like a lot of times like the explorer wanted to share the information, but a lot of times they kind of wanted to be recognized for that.
Mm-hmm.
I think I think you're probably right to some extent. It's the kind of the explorers that are going to go out and look for this information. But then a lot of times it's also kind of like achievers. Essentially, you get kind of the reverse of what I talked about, like the explorer getting to high level in order to explore better. This is achievers doing explorer's job in order to achieve better. To understanding mechanics, because that like I said, that's generally what the explorers used to do in the past, was that achievers want to know how to explore things, or how to be most efficient in dealing with things, and so they so basically the achievers still want that efficiency. They still want to understand the game mechanics on a deep level, and you just kind of have people that are able to do more programming work essentially in order to collect that data more easily.
And I think another example of like explorers in modern MMOs now would be like the progression raids that are trying to figure out the mechanics of raids,
right?
Like for on day one, like those that's an example of explorers exercising their motivation.
Right. Well, I mean, again, you have a little bit of a double edge here, where you like these are also achievers that want to get that world first clear, but they're relying on an explorer type, basically, usually to kind of analyze the mechanics in order to kind of like help figure out ways through them. And so again, like there's generally a very heavy synergy between the explorers and everybody, I think, like that. And we have a little bit of this on the chart, and we can kind of go over it. Because I think the unique aspect of Bartle's chart basic model is the interactions between the groups, which is something that we really don't see in any of the other descriptions. But anyway, so like the last group that we talk about is the killers, which tend to be like really kind of misunderstood. Because we like and Bartle himself basically kind of admits that killers was a terrible name for it. Like it's more it's more about control. So they're more about controllers, because you can have kind of the asshole PKer type, but you can also have people who just kind of want generally more control over other people, and this can include like guild leaders or den moms. So yeah, so we're gonna have a little example of somebody controlling Mulgrim trolling someone in a big fight by pulling them into the bad area so that they fall to their doom. It's kind
I
of like the negative aspect of the killer, the controller. Yeah, control freaks is a good example because and like it can even be a beneficial thing. Like like a lot of times in a social group, you might have someone who's like the motherly type. Even if it's not a female, like the den mom, like somebody who kind of looks after people, make sure people are okay. Like they're like basically like a parent. They're being very controlling. They're being they're making sure everything is fine with people. Uh, but that ultimately they're kind of like a social killer, a social controller. Uh, and so like that basically it's that aspect of control that they that essentially they want to exert. Um, and kind of like not necessarily so that they think they're the best or whatnot, but
yeah,
but
like I had an FC leader in an RP group I was in a while back that was, I would very much say she was a killer motivated person,
mm,
because she would want to control everyone's role play and make sure that they're following her expectations for the group's role play, and there wasn't much wiggle room with what the individuals of the group wanted. It was all to follow what she wanted for the group.
right, which is kind of like really kind of
Bad.
yeah, not necessarily something that's good for a RP group. But I mean, yeah, this is kind of like the same thing as the player killer who goes around just like sticking their sword in people, just to hear them scream, basically because they can. Um,
And then
but
burning all the
yeah,
loot that they drop.
right. And so yeah, so basically, and so the chart that Malgrim has up on screen right now kind of shows one of the interesting things about it is that you have the way the four groups interact. And so one of the interesting things you have here is basically the killers really control a lot of things. Um, because as you get more killers, you kind of decrease the other one. So basically, a green shaft and arrow basically means this is increasing, and a red a green arrowhead means that increases this other thing. So at the top here, at the very top, you have a red arrow pointing from achievers to killers, red shaft and red arrowhead meaning as achievers decrease, so do the number of killers. And so essentially, as you get more players, you're going to get more killers because you look at both achievers and socializers, which tend to kind of be the majority of modern MMOs. As those increase, you can get more killers. You're going to get more people who want to control. And so, this kind of the way I kind of state this is in a population you have a certain percentage of assholes. As you get more people, you're just going to have more assholes.
Big shock.
I know. And so, but of course, then the flip side of that is like, as you get more killers, basically that tends to decrease every other group, including explorers, which is kind of interesting. So basically, and this applies greatly to socializers, killers who basically want to become who want to control the people really like kind of harassing socializers essentially because they scream really loud. Is how Bartle puts it. They will complain the loudest and they will give the killer the most notoriety. Like there's no feedback better than someone screaming loudly, cursing your name, going on chat channels and hating you to let the killer know that yes, you controlled that person's player, that person's experience very, very, very completely.
Yeah, actually, in one of my link shells in 14,
Mm-hmm.
we were just, it was a hunt link shell of all things.
Mm-hmm.
We were Oh, my window's open. Okay, I'm sorry. I'm hearing noises and I'm freaking out a little bit. Um,
Just
we
me talking.
just keep swimming. Just keep swimming. We were talking about this person who's infamous in like the hunting on the server because he doesn't play nice. He doesn't our server does hunt trains where we wait to kill all the hunts until they're all spawned so that we can just wipe them all out and then have it's like clockwork. And this guy's been harassing people in our link shell network to the point where like he has to be reported, and he's like disrupting the social environment that has been created for hunts on our server. And I think that's a little bit of like a killer socializer interaction. Because he's literally just harassing people just for the sake of harassing. He doesn't get anything out of it. He's not creating he's not trying to like push change of any kind. He's just being an asshole basically and harassing people, right. Yelling at people. He tries to get people to go after hunts before the train is announced. So it doesn't sit well in the social sphere of the server.
And since you have that organized group of hunt people, like he has infamy spreads because everybody in the hunt link shell is going to know about that.
Yeah, and like apparently there are like 6 or 7 hunt link shells that were just blasting him yesterday. Wow. Because he just went full toxic mode.
Wow.
So I think that's actually a good example of what we're talking about.
Right. No, that I think that's a really good example. And so like, as that, if he's successful in doing this disruption, he's basically going to reduce the enjoyment that the hunt people are going to have, because if he's disrupting hunt trains, which is seen as the most effective way of most efficient way of doing hunts, he's going to like the hunt people are basically going to not enjoy that as much. And so if they're driven away from hunts and that's what they would like to do in the game, then they, essentially they're going to that's going to reduce their interest in the game, and then they're going to potentially maybe leave the game if they're not happy.
At minimum, or even I know a bunch of people are talking about doing hunts on other servers just to get away from him because of road visiting.
Right. But yeah, and so like and so the interesting here is like if you look at the explorers though, explorers are kind of interesting because as they increase, they decrease the killers, and the idea here is basically like explorers are kind of antidote to killers because they tend to know the mechanics better than killers, and so basically when the killers go to harass them, explorers tend to be the type of like buzz off kid. I know, they're able to work around kind of the obnoxious thing that the killers are doing, for what they're interested in. And as the explorers decrease, then you get an increase in killers. The other interesting thing to look at is basically as the explorers increase, they're kind of like a virtuous cycle. They will basically explorers draw explorers. The downside, of course, is like explorers tend to like content it's harder to make, whereas achievers will grind endlessly against something. Killers and socializers just the people. Explorers need very specific content that keeps them interesting. They need kind of like content that's basically continuously refreshed.
I think for a game that provides that for explorers, because there's not a lot of games that do that well for explorer types. I think Elite Dangerous is a good example of that.
Right. Elite Dangerous is probably really. I mean, and that's just because they model a huge universe, and there's a lot of time. Travel. It takes time to travel around and whatnot. So, yeah. And I worked on a game like we wanted to do online game based on the Anno series, or the and the idea, they were single player games where the idea was that you go, you have these islands that you would go explore and you harvest resources and then turn the resources into more advanced resources, and you'd be competing against other AI, usually AI characters, and so the combat was kind of like a really, really risky. So it didn't make much sense for you to, to play like a real time strategy and try to take out over other islands. So you had to set up trade with other islands until you, of course, gained enough power and then could risk the combat. But yeah, kind of the idea being, we wanted to kind of do kind of something similar to to that, where we had a huge world, and we had all these islands, and explorers would go around and do things like find efficient paths, because they essentially by just going around and exploring, and then they could sell these maps to other, sell or give these maps to other people. Of currents, to help, and then the achievers didn't have to go out and map out currents; they could just buy or get a map. But yeah, and so when you start looking at this, like one of the interesting things is that like looking how these things interact. Like I said, this is kind of unique to Bartle's model, where he has this interaction between the group of people. Because like if you look at a typical game, like I said, it tends to be very achiever focused. So what happens when you have a lot of achievers? Well, as achievers grow, so so do killers. And as basically as achievers grow, socializers are going to decrease. And this is mostly because if people are doing stuff, then there's less people going around to basically kind of like sit and chat. But a lot of like and then as the killers grow, though, kind of, so as a second order effect, as killers grow, that also makes all the other groups decrease. And so this is kind of what you saw, especially in early games, before, like especially games that try to kind of be hybrid PvE PvP games. You would basically see them cater to achievers, but then they would have this huge killer population. And a lot of early games too, like it was basically just really difficult because you'd have these griefers that would basically just go out of their way to basically harass and other people. And the reason why you have this, of course, is because, especially as they started removing PvP options, the reason you had this is because there was basically less. You still have the killers in the game, the people want to control their other people, but they would basically have less gameplay kind of suited to them to kind of divert that attention. And so one of the things that I'd like to see, I think it would be the most interesting, is like, how do you essentially tame the killers? How do you get the killers basically, because in the early days of MMOs, like especially like Ultima Online and whatnot, they generally talked in terms of wolves and sheep. The wolves being the killers, and the sheep being the achievers. Wolves prey on sheep, and sheep don't particularly like it. But the wolves need sheep, and so like if left unchecked, basically the killers will chase away the achievers, and then the game will die. I think this is basically what happens a lot of times to very small games, especially games that kind of like cater to killers, but they really have no kind of long-term plan. But kind of like what I was saying, though, is like my idea is like, the interesting thing is like, how do you kind of like contain the killers? How do you get the killers to basically work toward providing more interesting gameplay instead of just being like a thorn in the side of the achievers? And I think that that was always one of the things that I thought that would be interesting to explore. Like generally what we do these days is like we just provide a whole ton of tools for people to basically kind of deal with killers on their own.
Blacklists and stuff like that.
Right. GM reporting, that type of thing. I mean, it's really interesting because like recently Square Enix changed the terms of service for Final Fantasy 14, talking. They made it so that they would pay more attention essentially to harassment complaints. In the past, the response was, we can't monitor everybody. You're given a blacklist. Use the blacklist. But they decided that they were going to take a more active a more active stance and basically kind of rooting out the harassment, claims of harassment. And so, like, the problem, of course, the problem with that is then you get into kind of he said, she said, and then you get into kind of some meta play where people like the killers start using the reporting system as a weapon in itself. That was one of the problems that I ran into with Meridian 59. Um, uh, One of the problems I ran into with Meridian 59 was when somebody's losing a battle, then they would basically start using the administrators as a weapon to try to like, oh, those guys are cheating, whether they're cheating or not, there was accusations of cheating and harassment and whatever. That basically made that like the all of a sudden then the eye of Sauron would turn toward the enemies, and and if they were doing anything even a little shady, they had to clean up, and sometimes that would be a thing. Dejara basically says it can provide reasons for the killers to work together, which is basically the Eve approach. I mean, that's one thing. It's one idea. The other idea I had too was like allowing people to opt in to becoming essentially adversaries, to basically become enemies in the game. Some games had this. Like EverQuest, I think, had a monster play for a while, where like occasionally you could basically just take control of a monster. You'd have like really limited resources. You'd be kind of like a mini boss type monster. But then and then you could fight against enemies, and but eventually you'd lose. But like I was thinking, the other thing you could do is like if you have like factional warfare. Yeah, I think World of Warcraft does this to some extent. It channels some of the killer behavior um, into kind of like essentially supporting your faction and opposing the enemy faction.
Yeah. With modern Warcraft, you can opt into Warzone,
Uh-huh.
which is basically the PvP mode now. Like what used to be like the PvP servers, where Horde could attack Alliance as long as you're outside of your home territory.
Right.
Now there's Warzone, which gives you like 20% additional experience for for leveling while in Warzone, but you're flagged PvP.
Right.
But it's a voluntary thing, so that kind of that's where the killers go, and that's where the killers find their sheep that are just trying to use the XP bonus.
Right. Yeah, and like there's been talks about that before too. The problem you run into that, of course, is that then the achievers basically start crying because if this becomes the more if this becomes the more most efficient way to level up, well, they don't really want to have to deal with that downside. They don't want to deal with dying because that requires you to res and run back, go to the thing, and maybe the person's there camping the spot and whatnot. Um, Generally, when you try to kind of like force people into this type of thing, you run into problems because then they start complaining about the whole thing.
Yeah, I thought it was interesting because when I was leveling in WoW in my recent return, I didn't use Warzone. I level just of course I started with Demon Hunter, so I started at like level 100 or whatever. But
right.
Like I didn't have an issue leveling without Warzone with 4 heirlooms and all that. So
right.
I didn't see I didn't really find a need to go into Warzone to get my levels. I just dungeon grinded as a tank.
Right. I imagine like maybe people without so many heirlooms or people that had were more DPS maybe. But yeah, until like the like I said, the interaction between the four groups is I think is one of the more interesting things about Bartle's model. And of course, like it's fair to kind of talk about some of the weaknesses. It's very early. The original paper is published in 1996. And so you the so basically this is like before a lot of the big games, EverQuest and whatnot, is based on kind of observations of text mods, which I think it's still it's still a fair observation. It's still fair to kind of base things on text mods because they're not that different from MMOs. The major difference, of course, being scale. Um, which changes things, but like the basic gameplay is the same. And I think, but I think you can fairly kind of say it's a lot more dependent on the type of people that were online back then. Especially in the early days of text mods. The type of players tend to be a lot more homogenous. They tend to be people in universities, so that tended to be kind of like more wealthy or middle class, predominantly white people in the U.S. And so you can make some accusations that basically a lot of the when that level of homogeneity of the people is going means that you're gonna sometimes you're gonna be drawing incorrect conclusions from the data from observation. The other big thing that a lot of people don't, the people kind of like seem to miss out on is that the Bartle's model is for multiplayer games mostly. Achievers want to get high score because they want to demonstrate mastery to show off to other players. The idea of achieving for the sake of achieving is it's not really covered in Bartle's model. Socializers and killers obviously have rely on the multiplayer aspect, but I think kind of the one slightly weird thing again is going back to the explorers. But like I said, I think the explorers tend to be very heavily involved with the achievers. They were kind of the source of information the achievers would rely on in order to figure out what was the most efficient. So that's kind of where you get the multiplayer aspect of it. As we said also, like this is based on observation, not empirical data. Bartle has a lot of experience. He basically wrote the first text mod. He ran text mods commercially. He has a lot of experience observing these things, but it's not like he did a whole bunch of questionnaires and observed people under video cameras as they're playing the game to notice emotional reactions like some of the other models we're going to talk about have. And then and I'll say as I usually do, Bartle did add another axis. Later, he added an intrinsic, extrinsic motivation for each of the motivations. But that's published in his book, and as Bartle himself says, it's easier to draw a 2D graph than a 3D graph. It's also easier to remember 4 types instead of 8 types.
Mm-hmm.
But for example, like the one of the things I like talking about the explorer, the intrinsic explorer is called a oh shit, actually I'm trying to remember. Like the extrinsic explorer is a hacker. This is the person they're doing this in order to kind of they hack at the game. They want to understand the rules generally for some other purpose, and so they're kind of extrinsically motivated. The intrinsically motivated explorer is the scientist, where they're just doing it because they're just kind of curious, like how does this work? And this is a lot of times like the explorer types tend to be the people like game developers. Like I will go and I'll play a game and I'm going I will try to understand as much as I can about the game, just because that's what fascinates me. The mechanics fascinate me. So but he has these things for each of the 4 types. Socializer or the killer, the intrinsic extrinsic actually makes that the divide explicit, where I think it's the intrinsic motivated is kind of like the tends to be like the social killer. The extrinsic is the one that basically wants to hear people scream and wants to control their gameplay behavior. I could have this wrong. I don't have even though we were part of the point of this was that we could prepare better. forgot to take
Oh,
notes
I
about
got
this.
it.
So.
I was looking for it. His expanded categories. Here we go.
Right.
I had to pull up wiki. Um, that's not what I was looking at. Where to go?
But
Zoom.
anyway,
Why do you betray
there
me?
you
Okay, so here it is. Achievers, explicit are planners.
right,
Implicit is opportunists. Explorers, explicit is scientists. Implicit is hackers.
right,
Socializers, networkers, and friend. And killers are politician or den mothers and griefer.
right.
The other thing I thought that was interesting on this page is that they tried to pull out
Your
single
page
player.
is underneath the chat. Your
Is
page is
it?
underneath the chat, by the way.
Sorry about that.
You're
I
fine.
have to remember to put it on the right side.
Yeah.
Um,
You say you're saying sorry?
on the wiki page about Barlow's taxonomy, they tried to analyze single player motivations.
Yeah, Barlow was always very kind of hesitant about that, and that was one of the criticisms he had for a lot of people to apply it. Was that he built that around the idea of multiplayer games, and because that's what that's was basically what he focused on during his development career, was basically on multiplayer games. So I mean, and we'll get to Nicole Lazzaro's stuff later, where her four keys of fun, if you squint just right, you can kind of see a lot of the Bartle's player types there. So and hers is more is intended to be to apply it to more than just multiplayer games. So, uh,
I just thought it was
but
interesting that people try to do that.
yeah, and so basically you have the. It looks like I did get those backwards. So I know, horrible person. And again, like this is part of this is part of the reason why I don't go around. I like Bartle's four motivation model, but his 8 motivation model, the implicit explicit stuff tends to be a little confusing. It tends to add a lot more complication to it than I think.
Well, once you add a third dimension to anything, it kind of becomes unintuitive.
Right, exactly, and so, and again, like I said at the beginning, kind of the point of a lot of these player model things are basically to kind of to be shortcut, rules of thumb for designers. So if as it gets harder to understand, it becomes potentially less useful for you. But
like physics.
Right.
I'm sorry. Sorry, can I talk about flat Earth? No, I'm kidding.
No. Anyway, so again, the kind of the strength of this new model, this new format is interaction. So, did anybody have any particular questions, thoughts, concerns? I think Jajara basically says the space of type and interactions was too small. Could you want to expand upon that, Jajara?
I need to be back real fast.
Sure. Yeah, like I said, I think like the I think the interactions between the groups is what kind of makes the this model more interesting. So and a lot of what Bartle has talked about makes sense to me based on my own observations running Meridian 59 and playing in various games. Um, I've seen a lot of what he's talked about. Kind of like uh, 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 make sense to me to the point where I think it become I think it's useful to use it as a shorthand, as a rule of thumb. Again, it's not going to be perfect. It's not going to be it's not going to apply to every player, but I think on a larger scale it applies fine. And, and so like the well, again, like Dejara says, the interactions are oversimplified to the point where it's misleading. I don't think so. Like I said, like based on my observations, I think the interactions make sense, and they're supposed to be simplified. Like you can't like the whole point of these models is to simplify things down. Whether it's a useful simplification or not is is another story. For my own purposes as a designer, I think I find the interactions to be sufficient. Um, so when I'm designing games for multiplayers, I'm looking at how killers and explorers will interact with each other. I think Bartle's model is a good starting point for how I want to model it, or if I'm discussing with another designer. It's a good starting point for us to say, okay, well, this is what Bartle says is going to happen when these two groups interact. Uh, you know, is there going to be some mitigating factor in the game that changes how they interact? I I think just perhaps, but I think I like, but look at I think on the flip side, like there's a lot of designers that don't use Bartle stuff. Like I mean, I don't know for sure, but I'm assuming that the Square Enix designers haven't consulted Bartle, but like a lot of like what we just talked about with the behavior of that person trying to disrupt that hunt link shell. Um, uh, you have you basically if you look at it through the lens of Bartle, you have a killer trying to control someone else's experience. You have achievers that are upset about this, and or have a heavy social component because they're in a link shell. And so basically, the person probably keeps on doing it because they get infamy. Um, they they scream. Eve is the thing, and I'm going to say the same thing I'm going to say to you every time you draw it. Eve is such a outlier in every single way.
It is.
Trying to use it as an example, as it's the exception that proves the rule. I mean, basically, Eve. There's so many things about Eve that shouldn't work, that don't work, that other games have tried and have failed. That yeah, it's really hard to draw any conclusions from Eve Online.
Because there's no way to replicate Eve.
Right, and people have tried to replicate that type of thing. Well, I mean, it sure it tests it, but like it's one of those things. Again, like I said, these aren't going to be 100%. If it fits a lot of games but doesn't fit one game, that's still a useful model. You know, it's the physics equivalent of assuming things are spheres. It makes for useful shorthand. Are you going to get exactly down to nine nines precision on your calculations? No, but you can assume things are you can eliminate air drag. You can assume things are spheres. You can make good approximations with this. And I think in the vast majority of games, you're going to get accurate results. I mean, but the thing is, the Dejars, saying this old physics joke, assume spherical cows. But I mean, you can do things like assume, spherical objects, even if they're cows, and still get relatively accurate results. I mean, Mulgrim's the environmental scientist type, so and I took physics. I know how the squinting and making things work. Getting good estimates. See, a spherical cow, perfect. It's not a perfect sphere though, but yeah, So again, I think you're trying to point out a place where it fails, but I say that this kind of like this fits in with what we're talking about with a good model. It gives you a good starting out point. If you want 100% accuracy, then you go to the data, but it's impossible to talk about data in the same way that we can talk about a model.
Yeah, in my opinion, because Bartle's model was based off of MUDs, the happy like middle place would be to empirically study Eve's player bases and create a model based off that for Eve.
Right. Right. I mean, yeah. I mean, I think since Eve is such an outlier, if you want to have a model that a motivation model that accurately represents Eve, you're going to have to collect data from Eve. I don't know if they've ever done that. I know they hired they've hired a economist before, but
And that's just it. When a general rule of science, at least if I'm thinking correctly, don't quote me, but if a general rule of science doesn't work in a particular instance, then you have to create a specialized rule for that particular instance.
Right. I mean, when you can look at the divide between Newtonian physics and quantum as another kind of like we have rules for this area and we have rules for this area, and they don't really mesh together very well. Eve is quantum physics, and World of Warcraft and Final Fantasy 14 and all the other kind of Deku Mud derived games are Newtonian physics.
And playing it feels like quantum physics.
But yeah, so I think it's I think let's move on to the other ones, because we can hash this out repeatedly over and over again. But I think let's discuss the other two models, and we can kind of see how these ones kind of hold up to these arguments as well. So the next one is we're looking at Quantic Foundry's gamers motivations. I'm just going to pull up a lovely sheet. They have this, they have a really great site that kind of goes over it. They have some white papers, so we're not going to go into excruciating detail here. I don't, I'm going to say up front, I don't understand these other models quite as well as I do the Bottles model. So
we're going to have to chat for a little bit.
Yeah. So basically, but they have this lovely PowerPoint presentation. Where they talk about they have kind of these 6 motivations and 3 clusters. So basically, in the first cluster there, you have kind of the action social group, where the action people kind of want destruction, excitement. They want social people want competition, and community. As the things say there, basically it's about immediacy, adrenaline rushes. Generally it's about it basically talks about the adjective for this cluster might be bright. I think about maybe a better way to put it would be intensity. How intense is the game? If you're interested in kind of the action social group, you're gonna want more intense games. If you kind of score high in that. And he talks about later a game that isn't intense does not necessarily mean it's a bad game. It just means it's not going to appeal to the type of people who score high on action and social groups. The second kind of cluster here is mastery achievement. Mastery want the challenge. They want to kind of implement a strategy. The achievement people kind of want completion and power. So this is like a long-term, kind of figuring out mechanics, that type of thing. He says, the adjective for this cluster might be tall. I would say maybe depth is a better one for this, because a lot of these things achievement and mastery over a very deep and complex system is something that kind of really I think shows off this type of thing. And then the last one kind of you have the immersion and creativity. Where the immersion people kind of want story, fantasy, immersion, creativity, kind of want design, discovery. And so basically it says the adjective for this is kind of might be wide. I maybe also broad, you know, uh, being immersed in a world, especially like when you're talking about things like role playing, like the more the broader the world is, the more expansive the world is, the easier it is sometimes to find that that thing that kind of like really kind of like it catches you. Mulligram's talked about before, like role playing Makote, which is the cat person race in Final Fantasy 14. My character is a big Rogadin. I just like the kind of the shape of them. Like people tend to kind of like gravitate towards some of the things. So as you have more options, people will be able to find what they like. And so like and each of these motivations kind of uh, uh, are elements in the game. And again, like it doesn't mean like something that has a lot of immersion or a lot of breadth is a better game than something that isn't. It just means it's not going to appeal to the type of person that values immersion highly. Um, uh, and so basically you can kind of think of these on a scale. So each of these on a scale. So for action, you have people that, I think if you go down one slide, hologram, it talks about
The
uh,
spectrums.
yeah, the different spectrums, just kind of show like
Here we
one
go.
of them. But yeah, where it talks about kind of the idea of uh uh I actually go down another. Yeah, here we go. Yeah, so basically on the action social spectrum, you see the for community, it's kind of about shared experience. And so on the far end, you have kind of like this idea of like people who like depend independence. They really don't want a whole lot of community. And then on the far side of that, you have teamwork, where you have people who want a lot of community. And you can kind of see like there's example games here. Obviously, kind of the preference for independence, you're going to want probably gravitate more towards single player games. Whereas, if your preference is more for teamwork, you're going to be looking at multiplayer games. And so, again, like these are, it's both valid to have a game that focuses on independence. It's valid to have a game that focuses on teamwork. The goal here, of course, is that what you want though is you want basically the designer should kind of be aware of when they're making decisions and when they're making choices, that they can basically describe them and these different um, they can describe them basically on these different spectrums: community, competition, excitement, and destruction. um, for the action social spectrums. And then basically you have the other one, you have the other motivations as well. If you look at this, like of course the first thing the thing I was thinking of about this was the ocean model, the big five model for psychological profiles for people. Basically it's very similar to this, where you have ocean is basically five. There's five different kind of personality aspects. O is openness to new experiences. C is conscientiousness, and so on. And then each of those basically have five different what they call facets under it. And so it's basically it feels very similar to this type of thing, where you have things kind of rated on a spectrum. Um, but yeah, and so like the kind of the advantage here is that basically it's more universal than Bottles types, because it's not just multiplayer. And Yi basically spent a lot of time. He was at Stanford. I believe he got a doctorate, and he was basically he basically collected a lot of um, empirical data about this. Like when he started on MMOs, and he basically started um, he basically collected information about the original EverQuest actually. Um, and so and this kind of course, like this is kind of the flip side. It kind of shows some of the weakness, because he originally didn't find much explorer motivation, even though originally when he originally built his model, even though you kind of see one now, and the uh, kind of a uh, kind of an immersion creativity cluster. Um, but and part of my argument for that, of course, was that he was studying EverQuest pretty late in its life cycle. And and this was right around the time of the rise of the wikis and whatnot. So um, the game really didn't have a whole lot to explore, and B, the game also um, the game didn't have a whole lot to explore, but also the game what was worthy of exploring was basically cataloged pretty heavily. This is one of the first games that really had big wikis and data collection and data mining and whatnot. I think but he's expanded since then to include more data, to do a lot more things. Like if you go to the Quantic Foundry site, then you can actually kind of you can take a little test to show your different weights in the different areas. And basically to see kind of what your preferences are. And again, like and there's not again, keep in mind that these aren't you're good if you're high here, or you're bad if you're low here. It's just basically kind of like shows your preferences on the spectrum. And I think that I like his work because it really kind of he I mean, if you look at the games on the slides there and all the different motivations, he basically goes over a whole lot of games.
I like to point out that Hateful Boyfriend is on this list.
Yes. So obviously
he went to some dark places.
I mean yeah I mean that was so. Preference Dejar's asking for preferences of grinding. I think that kind of comes into a little bit for where you have kind of the difference between mastery and achievement, where I think like achievement really kind of goes especially when you start talking about MMOs, really kind of goes hand in hand with grinding. I like achievers don't necessarily love grinding, but I think achievers are willing to put up with more grinding because it gets them to the goal they want to have.
Excuse me. They're kind of compelled to grind.
Right. I mean, because like if you go back to that slide, or the achievement, basically looking for completion and power. And completion like just means you're going to be doing a whole lot of stuff in order to complete the game.
There we are.
Right. Basically, you're just going to be doing a whole lot of things to complete that game. And so or to accumulate power, like especially when you start talking about MMOs where you don't have like shortcuts and cheats and whatnot.
I can give you an example.
Yeah, go for it.
It's a single player game, but Breath of the Wild. I just have this compulsion that I have to not only 100% the game, but I have to 100% the game on master mode too.
Right.
And that requires me to do a lot of parts of the game that I don't like.
Right. Kind of beat your head against it. I mean, and RPGs, RPGs are kind of the same thing, where it's like, you're going along, you're fighting combats, everything's fine, and then often you'll like run into an area, run into a boss where you just get fucking, you get your face beat the fuck in, and then you're like, oh, I guess I have to go grind and get more experience, get more levels, get more money to go buy better equipment now. Or I have to like go buy the potions I use, go replace the potions I used, failing that first time. So I think and as much as people kind of my example of this is also another Zelda game. I talk about when I was younger I had a much higher tolerance for grinding because as an explorer type, I wanted to find all the secret entrances in the original Legend of Zelda. And when I found that blue candle, that was amazing. I was like, yeah, I will. I now I have a way to burn down doors. I'd go flame a couple trees, leave, come back, flame a couple more trees, leave the screen, come back. I didn't again.
Go ahead. Sorry.
This is before I even knew that the red candle existed, where you can use it multiple times per screen.
I have found fire. I will use fire.
Exactly. And so like and so like that became a very grindy game for me. But basically is because I wanted some of it was achievement, and some of it was kind of the discovery aspect of it. Again, I think you're kind of seeing another example where the model's not perfect because burning down trees is that a completion thing or is that a discovery thing? I
Yes.
could see kind of yeah, you could argue either way, or yeah, you could say it's both. But those are two separate categories. So, um,
You go
yeah,
to the discovery to get to the completion.
right, yeah. I mean, yeah. So, like these models, kind of going back to the discussion we had with the jar before, like these models are intended to kind of be shortcuts. These are intended to be shorthands for you, not necessarily to explain out in excruciating detail exactly how players interact. You can basically say, oh, players will generally kind of behave in these ways based on the model. Oh yeah, well I mean like Dejar says seen people be completely lost without their progression time. Oh yeah, like open world games are like are not there's a lot of people that hate open world games because they just don't like that feeling of not knowing what to do next. I mean that's one of the biggest complaints I've heard about Eve is that like they get in there it's like okay now what, and like generally what happens what happens with Eve is that people will kind of like find their fun eventually, but like a lot of times it comes from essentially other players saying, "Oh, well, you want to do this first. You want to do that first. You want to do this other thing first." And so they like Eve kind of removed the explicit content treadmill and kind of made it more of a social thing, which I mean makes some sense because the play the players will want to do players will know essentially what's the most efficient way, effective thing to do. Um, especially when you're not just kind of mindlessly grinding experience points. But yeah, so it's kind of that's the gamer motivations. Did you paste a link to it?
Yeah,
Yeah,
I
yeah,
put a link up as soon as I bring it
yeah.
onto the screen.
Right. Yeah. So yeah, that's a link directly to this PDF we're showing. But if you go to the quanticfoundry.com site, they have a lot more information about it, and they like I said they have it where you can kind of like it's a little involved, so set aside 15 minutes or something like that. But they use that to kind of like tell you your motivations. But I think they also use it to kind of collect some data as well.
Ooh.
But yeah, because you have to kind of tell the type of games you like and whatnot. So. I'm
Um.
sure I confuse the hell out of them because I'm like, I like Final Fantasy 14 and Nekotsume, which is a mobile game about collecting cats, or actually photos of cats. So
I think I know that game.
yeah. It's yeah. I don't play it quite as hardcore as I used
I
to.
had to delete it. I was not
Yeah.
responsible enough for this game. I saw it about myself and deleted it.
Right. But yeah, so that's kind of the motivation. So, any discussions, questions, thoughts?
So,
Um,
I don't know.
did you have any
Um,
thoughts?
me?
Yeah.
No, that's my standards. That's my status quo. Is no.
I
Uh,
think yeah, like I said, like you have it has it. I think it is a little more complete model because it has the spectrum. Um, it's like whereas Bartle the original stuff feels a little binary, either you're exploring or not. This kind of has two different ends of a spectrum for each of the different motivations. I think that's very interesting. Um,
I think with Yee's model,
mhm,
and I haven't looked that much into Yee's model.
mhm,
And we haven't discussed it as in depth,
right.
but I feel like with Yee's model, there's a you can look at it as a spectrum, but you can also look at it more in a more linear uh, motivation leads to motivation leads to motivation aspect for an
Mm,
individual. I think
mm,
there's an argument to be made somewhere in there. I'm not making that argument right now because I need to look at it more. But
right.
I think there's an argument for that linear motivation trend. Like like
Right.
like what discovery leads to completion. Let me where to go. Because like discovery leads to completion. It can also be, you know, stories can lead to social communities like roleplay.
Right. Right. Or vice versa, like as people kind of grow together in a community, you might have story, people starting to want to tell stories, collaborative stories with each
Mhm.
other.
Yeah, I think there is like an interaction between these different types in
Right,
there, but
right. But yeah, it's not
it's
explicitly kind of described
right.
in the model. Yeah. Because like playing is a really interesting thing. Because like in Bartles it's like, well, that's kind of generally a socializer thing. Um, but yeah, it's like so in Nikki's in the Quantic Foundry stuff, like where does that really fall? Because like it pulls in a lot of different things. Like basically immersion obviously kind of is a fantasy story, but you also like there's a lot of there's a lot of research that goes on to like people finding like little bits of lore in the game. Um, like for Final Fantasy 14, I know like there's like people will go through a lot of the side quests, and even like they'll look at things like fates, which are basically like limited time events that go on. Like people look at the little flavor text for this and go, oh, it mentions this thing, or they walk by an NPC that says something. Oh, this NPC said this thing, and it has this consequence, and it goes to this thing, and so, um, and then like then of course you have the social community aspect. Not really a whole lot of competition in. It's you have the spars and combats and whatnot. It's kind of a social competition aspect. But usually kind of that serves the kind of the greater story thing. So like role playing, you're kind of looking at kind of covering three different the social, the immersion, and creativity aspects.
Yes, I think that's kind of interesting.
Yeah. I think I can definitely kind of see that. I'd probably imagine like the argument being made that that kind of works into the model. Like role playing is something that has you know high elements of community, social community, high elements of immersion story, immersion fantasy, and high elements of creativity, design, discovery.
Hmm.
Um, but maybe even some design, I guess. Because again, like people decorate up locations to make them all pretty and stuff
Oh, you should
for
see
role playing
some
spaces.
some of the role play player houses I've been in. They are crazy.
Right.
Uh, I know one particular house that I went into that had private houses in the back.
Mm.
It was an FC house, and there was like a BDSM dungeon in one of them. And I was like, holy shit!
Right.
And there's like a forge, and I'm just like, I'm leaving now. Thank you.
Yikes. Yeah, the Java saying Yee's model, is kind of static. Um, well, Yee's model also tends to be kind of like it works a lot like it's basically very scientific minded. Like I said, I think he initially had 5 different motivations, which were like three of them were very similar to Bartle's, with achievement, killer, and explorer. No, he didn't find explorer, achiever, killer, and socializer. He didn't really find explorer. He did discuss immersion, kind of as a role playing thing. Um, I forget what the other one was, but basically the model has changed over time, as he's collected more data. And so I think that you get basically like the model itself has changed based on as more data becomes available.
Hmm. Which I mean is scientific in itself to
Right. Right.
change your model as you learn more.
Right. Exactly. So I think
Yay!
I think that's where the dynamism comes in with this model. It's like it's changed over time. But yeah, like kind of like what Malgrim was talking about, though, is like you really don't see much of the interaction between them. And that that might be either be beyond the model, or the model may say like these are essentially kind of independent. These can be independent of each other, but in some cases, like role playing, they can interact with each other.
He, because of the way it's structured, he might have just left it to the reader to determine the interaction
Right.
based on
Or
the
the
circumstances.
right. The flip side of that too is like they also provide consulting services. So if you want that special sauce, the secret sauce, you have to
You got to
you have
pay
to put it
for
in
it.
cash. Yeah, exactly.
Nice.
This is what you pay them to tell you.
Really, is that what the business is?
Yeah, they do. Um,
Because I was gonna ask like what his company actually did.
as far as I know, yeah, they do. They do basically do.
Design consultations.
Right.
Huh.
Yeah, and so I mean, and so like, I think that's kind of another kind of advantage you can kind of talk about with the Bartle was that he was looking at his work basically was published. The eight motivation model was published in a book of his. So I mean, I'm sure he probably did that intentionally to try to push more books, but it's pretty well known now. Um,
Oh. Apparently, ArenaNet is a client of theirs.
yeah, I mean, basically like game companies hire consultants all the time like that. So
I know. I just saw it on the front page. That's all.
right.
So we're gonna hire them when we start making our own game, right?
Something like that.
The Malgrim game of make a game based off the podcast based off of a game.
Way too meta for me. The podcasting game. It's like what is it? Game story. Podcast story.
Oh no.
Yeah. So the last model we're gonna look at is Nicole Lazzaro's 4 Keys to Fun. Like Yi, she basically did a lot of research based on this. Her company Zio Design basically does observation for this type of thing. I've seen she's given talks before. Nicole's given talks before about her what she does, and a lot of her stuff was basically a lot of her work was based on emotion. So she would basically set up cameras while people were playing the game, and then basically go through and review it, looking at what players' emotional reactions were. Even if and this tends to be a lot more accurate than asking people how they felt afterwards, because a lot of times people kind of ignore spur of the moment feelings, or they might have like a flicker of emotion on their face for a second that they don't remember. But yeah, so basically she, like Varl, kind of divides things into 4 types. You have hard fun, easy fun, serious fun, and people fun. If you squint hard enough, you can kind of see some of Bartle's types. Hard fun tends to be basically overcoming obstacles, and basically she coined this word, this Italian word that I love using, of fiero, which is the idea of like throwing up your fists in victory and giving a victory. That's fiero. Basically, like I said, a lot of her work has to do kind of with emotion, and so um, uh, and again, she kind of like looked a little bit on a spectrum where you have more hard fun, you add points, new strategies. If you want less, you add fun failure states. Um, kind of the idea being that like the hard fun person wants to overcome obstacles. If it's fun to fail, well then there's no motivation to kind of do that thing. And kind of like looking at wanting challenge and skill. And so then you kind of have easy fun, which I think it's a little bit of a misnomer, but like again, these are models, like they're not perfect, but the easy fun um, tends to be a lot more kind of like a curiosity, what's over the next hill, wandering around, kind of taking in things, and it is kind of obviously kind of the hard fun is Bartle's Achiever. Easy fun is more Bartle's Explorer in a single player, wanting to kind of go and see what's over there. Again, and so she talks about, like, if you want to add more easy fun, add more off track play, this is the open world thing. Like, you have the main track, the efficient way going through, but the more stuff you add off of it, the more easy fun people will kind of engage in. If you want less of that, then basically you can add badges and rewards, and that kind of keeps people. That's what kind of Jara talked about before. Um, talked about before, kind of like, people who have trouble, when they don't have kind of that path laid out before them. And so badges and rewards kind of tell you, hey, keep on going that way, keep on going that way. You're doing the right thing by going this way. You're getting points, so you're doing the right thing. And then you basically have serious fun, which doesn't quite map to Bartle's Killers, but you can kind of see it a little bit. Where serious fun kind of like, is about relaxation and excitement. But it also tends to be kind of like, have a higher purpose. As she puts it in the thing, tangible and meaningful rewards. I would assume, like, kind of like you look at like gambling as this type of thing, like, how it would have serious fun, where people find gambling enjoyable, and if you win money, then it's all the better. But less, you allow more experimentation. Allow people to kind of do different things, see what works, see what doesn't. Give kind of be a space where people can explore more. And I think that but like, relaxation, kind of that Zen focus type of aspect. I mean, people talk about when they when they get into a really competitive game, they kind of get in that zone. And so I think, that's kind of why serious fun and excitement kind of like ties into the killer thing. It's very, it's I'd say it's more about the emotions felt by the killer rather than describing why a killer does it. And so the final one, of course, is people fun, which is pretty obvious. This is the socializer. This is playing with other people. This is kind of interacting. Role play. Chat, that type of thing. And so add more. Add caretaking and comparison. A lot of people kind of like, give people a reason to kind of talk about their game experience, and less of it, you require more skill. Where skill is something is where you have to develop over time, and you could potentially still have a little bit of people interaction, in a very skillful game, but in general, it's going to be more about kind of like building yourself up. But yeah, and so these four, so these are the four keys of fun. Again, these tend to be kind of on a spectrum, a continuum. And basically, games can, you make a conscious design decision. Oh, we want to focus on moderate amount of hard fun, a large amount of easy fun. And some people fun. We're not going to worry too much about serious fun, and that's then you're developing an open world game, open world multiplayer game. And so basically, kind of understanding, again, like understanding, and so you kind of start to understand what kind of emotive and what kind of emotions these people will be experiencing from different parts of your game. If you have something that's going to be very if you're gonna have something that's going to be that hard fun, you're going to have kind of that range of emotion from kind of frustration to overwhelming fear, fist pumping excitement when you finally overcome something. But the flip side of that is you do have that kind of that frustration when you can't quite get something done. And I think kind of a good example of this would be like what we talked about with hardcore raiding. That's kind of the range of emotion you have, or some people, and you look at kind of like people's tolerance for that. Like the hardcore raiders are the type of people that are willing to kind of like beat their face against this content, and then feel really great when they finally do it, especially if they can brag about doing it, getting a server first.
And then they get to do it all over again.
Repeatedly every week when it's on farm mode.
Right? Every year. The race for world first.
Right. And so, yeah, so again, this is, I think, again, like I said, you can squint and see some of Bartle's work on that. It's very funny. I was kind of sitting with another MMO designer when we first attended a talk, one of Nicole's talks, and so, he was the one that pointed out to me, like, oh yeah, he hand out for a talk, and he wrote down the Bartle types in each of the quadrants he had. I'm like, oh yeah. Her model's been pretty consistent because like she did, as far as I understand, she did a lot of work before she developed this model. So it's like I said, it's also based on empirical data that she's collected.
All I have to say is, because this one's more about emotions and feelings, it makes me very upset that I have to keep rotating my head to read the poster.
Just learn to read sideways and upside down like I do.
I mean, I can, but not on a screen like this. Meh. Meh.
You just want the easy fun, not the hard fun.
I want the people fun. I want to fuck with people.
Yeah. So I mean, so that's the kind of the last. So again, like like a beginning, like the idea of these is a perfect model, but to kind of like allow designers to, as they're designing, like to understand, in general, in broad strokes, what their design, what are basically like the consequences, or the kind of the when they make a certain design decision, what's going to be the consequence of that. And then and then also to be able to say, okay, well, again, using Nicole's model here, if we look at like hard fun, oh well, if we're doing a moderate amount of hard fun, a lot of easy fun, and some people fun, then like you can communicating that much information and that amount of words is an amazing thing, because like when you come down to the game design, it's a lot about is what a lot of what it's about is about communication,
being able to convey your thought to the people.
Right, because like right, because in game design, like you can have the best idea ever, but if you can't communicate to people working on the thing, then and sometimes like that even means communicating to yourself, to really just understanding the consequences of understanding what you want to do. You might say, oh, I want to have this really fun game. Well, what does fun mean? What is and that's where Nicole's thing is comes in handy, because she kind of breaks down this kind of big hairy concept of fun into something that's more manageable. But yeah, and so I think that I think learning about these different models is useful as a designer, because it helps you, it gives you more tools, and like, something, a lot of times the popularity of a model also helps, because you might have, you might be able to kind of like if I can go up to a fellow designer and discuss something based on Lazzaro's 4 types of fun here, then then if I can, like I said, if I can just say, okay, we want these levels of this type of fun, that's an incredibly efficient way of doing that. But of course, it requires some understanding.
Yeah. Speaking of fun, that made me think. Final Fantasy 14 going into Heaven's Ward.
Mm-hmm.
They had some class design issues with the Bard class.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that the development team said was it wasn't fun to play, so we had to scrap our design and start from scratch, with 3 months until launch.
Mm.
And so the funny thing is, in Heaven's Ward, nobody liked Bard. No one thought Bard was fun with what they
Right.
with what they made. So it makes you wonder what was the other thing that they were working on like. How
Right.
bad was not fun if what we got still wasn't fun.
Wasn't great. Yeah, yeah. And you know, this is kind of like, I think, you know, we can kind of talk a little bit about the nature of MMOs here, but sometimes, like, you know, it feels like there's sometimes change for the sake of change, where, you know, they create, you know, they created um they wanted to, you know, change. They changed all the classes, how all the classes work, and, you know, it's one of the, you know, question about how Bella. You know, kind of a question of like what happens if, um, uh, you know, what, you know, why did they feel the need to change Bard? Because like Bard, like ARR Bard was actually one of my favorite classes. You know, I basically I did a lot of Summoner because that was amazing to solo with, and then you know, for like a lot of the raid stuff and whatnot, I went Bard because I had some cool songs that helped other people. I was able to move and shoot, and I could be movie and shooty. You know, which is something that you couldn't do. You could do somewhat with Summoner, but you know, to a lesser extent. Um, and yeah, and then when Heavensward came, you know, basically, what Cherry Blossom says is, it's time to be a damn arrow wizard. If I wanted to cast spells, so be Black Mage. I'm on the fence about Stormblood Bard. They add a lot of complexity to it, with kind of maintaining the songs and whatnot.
Yeah,
Um,
I'm not a big fan. I think it's a little too convoluted.
I think it's as someone who basically, like, you know, tries to get max level in every class on my character. Um, I think like they add a lot of like little things that kind of like feel a bit like annoyances, because like, you know, I mean, in some ways you can kind of argue that it makes the classes feel, you know, play a lot differently than each other. Like, you know, like machinist and bard play differently because they have these little things that, you know, you have to kind of master in order to get the most out of it. But the flip side is, like, you know, if I'm not doing progression rating, um, yeah, I kind of, you know, I don't, you know, like the feeling I have to, you know, get, you know, split second timing, perfect timing to play the class well. Um, you know, isn't my favorite, but Jaros, you know, kind of does the same thing. It's like, you know, one of the devs play the same game you do. Well, I mean, one of the problems you run into with as a designer, and I think this is like, I think this is kind of goes back to kind of the usefulness of models like these player motivation models, is that you're not the typical game player, especially if you're talking about the game that you're playing. You know so much more information about the game, that you can't just, like, you know, pretend not to know. Like, you know, these things are going to influence how you play, and you know, I think like a lot of the stuff, like, you know, uh, you know, like there might have been, like, you know, when we talk about the Heavens Ward Bard, there might have been like some logic, some rationale that, you know, the developers knew about why this made, you know, like, you know, for example, because like, so basically, you know, for people who don't play Final Fantasy 14, the big thing in Heavens Ward that, you know, it was a stance called Wanderer's Minuet, which there's a Wanderer's Minuet now that's completely different. But, you know, but it used to be a stance where if you didn't have it on, you could basically, all your weapon skills were immediate fire, and you basically had high mobility. You turn on the stance, it gave you, I think, a 30% damage
Mm-hmm.
increase, but it gave cast times to all your stuff. Well, of course, like, you know, the idea being here that, you know, I want 30% more damage, so I'm gonna be, you know, I'm gonna keep that stance on.
And
Um,
certain abilities required it to be on as well.
right. And I think also the thing was, you didn't auto attack, whereas, you know, when you had it
Correct.
off, basically you kind of fire arrows as auto attack in addition to basically your skill attacks. And so, like, you know, I could potentially see how they would think that people would like do essentially a lot of stance dancing, you know, popping in and out of Wanderer's Minuet based on, you know, like,
Oh,
timing one. I think in practice that didn't really work out that way,
It did.
especially for the more casual player.
It did when you're raiding, but
Well, I mean, yeah, well, I mean, when you're raiding, like it is like saying like when you're talking about the very the exceptional aspect here. Like yes, when I'm sure when you're raiding, like people who understood the system well could manipulate it well in order to because part of learning a lot of raids is like knowing the timing of things, even if it's slightly randomized. Um, Knowing when you can basically knowing when to do your big blast spell and when not to trigger your cooldown, right when the boss jumps and waste your that cycle.
yeah, I mean that was a lot of the stance, yeah. Because
right.
in Heaven's Ward I got the last raid group I tried to be a part of was needed me to play Bard because we already had healers. And we were raiding a Sephiroth. And so I had to spend like 2 weeks against the target dummies just to figure out the rotation and all that. And then I get into Sephiroth and I was like, oh shit, I'm gonna have to stance just to dodge AoEs.
Right.
And I'm quoting myself there.
It's a direct quote. Right. And so yeah, I think you yeah, and so again, like when you start talking about raids or extreme stuff or whatnot, like that is a minority concern. Most people, most people kind of just like did simple analysis on it and said, oh, 30% more damage if I have this on, keep it on.
Right. And I mean, if we want to go into parsing some percentages, 14 follows the WoW model. As far as I'm aware, I might be a little off on the numbers. But in Warcraft, at least back when I used to do parsing in there, for most classes, auto attacks would equate to 30% of your DPS for most of the melee classes. At least it did for Feral Druid during Wrath of the Lich King. I don't know if it's still true now, but I want to assume because they keep using 30% number, like during that stance era, they kept using that 30% number for like stances and stuff. So I can't help but assume that they're using that 30% auto attack proportion. But that's just an assumption. I haven't parsed the numbers for that in particular.
Right.
But it would make sense.
Right.
If they just gave you the 30%, which then just kind of makes it kind of dumb that it's just like converting. Oh, well, we're going to take away your auto attacks, but we'll just give you that percentage back.
Right.
Why are you taking my auto attacks away then? Like mathematically, you would want to get a little more.
Right.
Of it. That's just me thinking.
Yeah, I've never parsed that. I don't know, but yeah, again, and so like but these are the kind of the things that that sometimes designers kind of go in and consider and whatnot.
Yeah. So. Oh no, we ran out of a script. I don't know what to do now.
Well, I mean, we're at the 2-hour mark, so.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think that I think the one thing that Vela says is misses the fire AOE. Yeah, that was a nice thing for bards. That was kind of like one of the shames of like the rework of the bard class. It felt like it took away some aspects of its utility and kind of refocused it on other areas. So yeah, I guess they're reworking the classes yet again for Stormblood. So I mean Shadowbringers. Like every expansion.
The thing that pissed me off with Bard and Stormblood, amongst many things, was they put the straight shot and Reign of Death
On the same,
cooldown reset
right.
on a timed song instead of it just being a passive.
Mm.
And that really annoys me because it's really hard to get a healthy number of procs in 30 seconds.
Mm.
The other thing that gets on my nerves is the other thing that gets on my nerves with Bard is to do the most effective rotation. You want to use Iron Jaws to refresh your dots every 30 seconds. When Iron Jaw itself runs on a, I think, 14-second reset timer.
Mm.
Or no, Imperial Arrow has a 14-second recast time, which high-end bards they'll pair Iron Jaws with Imperial Arrow just because in Heavensward Imperial Arrow lined up with your dot timers. So that's how you reminded yourself to refresh your timers, was
right.
just to tap those two at the same time, basically.
Right.
But now the dot timers are 30 seconds long, so you have to remember to use your Iron Jaws every other Imperial Arrow.
Mm-hmm.
Which just gets really annoying on top of all the other things you have to pay attention to with the class. So I get in the habit of, just Iron Jaws in every Imperial Arrow, which is then wastes 15 seconds of your dot timers. So that wastes,
right.
2 global cooldowns every 15 seconds. But this is me in Raider mode analyzing a rotation.
Right, right.
Oh no, I'm an achiever. Whatever will I do?
Right, right. So yeah, and so exactly, and so trying to kind of figure out those different things.
And the other thing, oh, never mind. I was gonna talk about macros, but we don't have to go into it.
Well, I think like one of my complaints about 14 in general, kind of substitutes like keeping track of things, for skill.
Mm-hmm.
Like there's just a lot of like kind of like what you're saying, like you have these two dots, and if you time it right, then you basically are using this one skill to refresh both dots. But if you time it wrong, then you have to use the two things that apply the dots again. And like the original dots are not quite synced up, right? So yeah.
That's the other thing that annoys me with their dot classes. None of the dots ever line up properly.
Right, right. Again, I think that's kind of part of the point is that it's to kind of make it so that you can't just push the same buttons repeatedly over and over again into the same into the same keep on just you can't essentially can't macro it.
Right. But that yeah, but it's annoying. Like it just feels sloppy.
Right, right, and I mean, no, I agree. I think it's something that kind of like really frustrates me as well. I don't find that type of thing very fun.
Like
But
for an example of like dot classes that I do enjoy, or I have enjoyed in the past, was like Unholy Death Knight in Warcraft.
mm,
Because it would apply plagues and dots and all sorts of fun stuff, but all of those dots were just connected on your normal attack rotation.
mm,
So, like, the dot durations weren't your focus. You didn't have to worry about that because you were just using your rotation and they just were a part of it.
mm.
Which I really enjoyed that out of that class. And I think Unholy Death Knight was an Alpha Strike class too. Which I love Alpha Strike classes. I just do.
Right.
It's my favorite playstyle, and I'm so sad that 14 doesn't have anything that resembles Alpha Strike.
Mm-hmm.
But that's just me. That's just...
It tends to be kind of really hard to it tends to be really hard to kind of balance those type of things, though.
Oh no, I totally understand.
In order to make up for the Alpha Strike, then you have to kind of have their normal damage kind of be kind of crap, which is, you know, not very you know, it's not very satisfying usually.
Yeah, I mean, I get it. It's just like mathematically I get it. Like Alpha Strike classes aren't really that good unless you know you're good at spamming that one ability or rotating around that one ability. But for some reason, just in my brain, there's something that I just enjoy about it. There's just something fun about being like, and now I get to stab, you know?
Right.
I really don't know why I enjoy it, even though like logically I know that it's not the best like class design in a game. But it's just something I enjoy about it. I just think it's fun.
Yeah.
Especially if there's a good animation involved with it. In the Old Republic, the Jedi Shadows Alpha Strike was just just like a spin wheel of lightsaber lights. It was beautiful.
Right.
So yeah, that was our talk. Yeah. Did you want to play an after the fact game, or do you just want to call it?
I think we can call it here, and then kind of I think you and I can talk a little bit about what we thought. But you know, I'm kind of curious if anybody has any feedback. You can throw it in the chat here, or you know, we have the Discord, so you know, we can set up, you know, kind of go ahead and talk there. Let us know what you thought.
Yeah, I can set up like a feedback channel. I mind you very much, Vela. Oh, she's just making castles. Okay, never mind. It's whatever. Yeah, so if I feel good about this one. So let's find someone to raid and give some Twitch loving to. I wonder who we'll pick. Whoever could be online at this hour. Okay, say hi to Surian for me. Give him some love and attention, and at least say hi before you disappear. I appreciate it.
Yep.
And we'll see you guys next week. I'll probably do a stream Friday or Saturday, I think. So, see you then.